The following program is made possible by the Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College, CUNY.
Exorbitant pay packages, CEOs who loot their companies, accountants who cook the books. The display of shocking behavior at the top of American corporations has been relentless these past few years. But there are people who are supposed to protect shareholders from all this, and they're the directors. Where have they been? Were they complicit? Asleep? I'm Sarah Bartlett, and I'll be discussing this and other issues today on USA Inc. Mention the words corporate governance, and in the same breath, you'll almost certainly hear the name Ira Millstein, a senior partner at the law firm of Weil, Gotshal & Manges. No individual has been more active in analyzing this issue and advising boards of directors on what they need to do to make themselves more effective. Ira, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
We're in a very interesting moment where the courtrooms are filled with CEOs who've been accused of all kinds of terrible things. Can you tell me, where were the directors in all of this?
No. They were sitting in their chairs, clearly. But it's pretty clear that directors had not been as active as they might be during this period of time.
Isn't that an understatement?
Yes. And I, you know, because I didn't live in those boardrooms. And you really can't tell what's happening in a boardroom by looking from the outside in. The only way you can ever tell what's happening in a boardroom is to be there. So how asleep, how inattentive, I just can't answer that question. But from the outside looking in, one would have to wonder where they were and how some of these matters escaped their attention. And certainly it's worth asking the question. And certainly the perception is, on the part of the Senate, stock exchange, the regulators, the public, that something was wrong.
Why is it so hard to be a good director?
Well, it is hard to be a good director because management controls the information flow to the board. Remember that the directors don't run the company. They're there supervising and monitoring. So they don't actually have the mechanisms to produce the information that they need. And if a management wants to fool around, it can get away with it for a certain length of time. If the CFO and the CEO and whoever want to so-called cook the books, they can cook it for a while before the board really finds out what's happening. The board generally doesn't find out what's happening until something goes wrong. Supposing the board is constantly provided with erroneous information by the management. Yes, they can ask questions. Yes, they can probe. Yes, they can do all of those things, but they're not running the books.
Well, why would anyone who is intelligent and responsible want a job where they're so able to be blindsided?
Well, the point is, and this is where corporate governance hits the road. I mean, the job of the director is to make sure you have a management that isn't fooling around, that is credible, that is legitimate, and is worthy of performance. And the board's role is to pick management in whom it has confidence. It's the first line of defense for a board of directors. The first line of defense is to make sure the management is okay and legitimate and credible and giving it the information that it needs.
But isn't it usually the other way around? You talk about boards picking management. It seems to me that it's management picking boards.
Well, that has been the case in the 70s and 80s, but in the 90s it began to change, and boards became aware of the fact that it was, remember, the statute's clear. The corporation is run by or under the direction of the board of directors. That's it. And management only manages when delegated to manage by the board of directors. So the board of directors always had the legal responsibility to pick a performing board. And they failed, I'm afraid, in some cases. There's another thing that happens. When a company is doing very, very well, and during the bubble, everybody was doing well, the tendency is to say, well, everything's fine. Stock's up, profit's up, everything's doing well. Why do we have to pay a lot of attention? And it isn't until somebody falls off the cliff that the board finds out, well, we were only doing well because somebody was cooking the books or fooling around in some way that wasn't legitimate. But again, I come back to the fact that first and foremost job as a director is to make sure that you've got the right management. And I think boards have learned that now, if they've never learned it before, is that their first line of defense is to have a good CEO and a good CFO. Now, the new legislation doesn't hurt that. In fact, it sort of sticks the board's nose into it and management's nose into it by saying that as far as numbers are concerned, the CEO and the CFO now have to certify. Now, what does that say to the board? It says to the board, now you better make sure that the CEO and CFO are the type of people who, when they certify something and swear to it, are to be dependent upon that it's true.
But don't the directors also have to certify?
Well, they have to sign, but not to the same extent. They don't have a criminal liability, I don't believe, I hope, with respect to numbers. I think it's the CEO and CFO. But again, it's the right approach because it's saying to the management, you are supposed to produce the right numbers to the board so that they can make the appropriate judgments. So I'm not defending those boards. I'm simply saying that going down the road and looking to the future, bear in mind that the board gets information only from management. Yes, management is now compelled to be a lot more open, honest, and legitimate than it was before, but it still comes down to the issue of picking the right people, and if you haven't got the right people, getting rid of them.
Do you feel that the boards are spending enough time? I mean, I
now,
know.
Yes. I think since the scandal and since the Sarbanes-Oxley rules and since the New York Stock Exchange and since people like Sarah Bartlett and others who keep an eye on all of this and talk about it here and in the media, you bet they're paying a lot more attention. One of the things that board members don't like is to read about themselves in the newspaper. I think they like it less than being sued. There's nothing like publicity to get everybody's attention. And I think any board member that thinks that the public's going to lose interest in what's happening in any time soon is crazy. And they're not crazy. I've talked to many of them. They're aware of the fact, especially with the bigger companies, that they're out there and that the public expects a lot more of them than they've had in the past. And I think they're responding. I think they're spending the time.
I guess the question, though, is if you have been nominated to be on this board and you know that the name came from the CEO and you've known that CEO socially, you're on nonprofit groups together, you go to cocktail parties together, how difficult is it to ask that CEO really tough questions?
Very. No issue. You're right. The issue then is your company subject to that kind of an approach to new directors? Is the CEO the one who's producing the names, telling the board what he wants or she wants, and making it happen? If that's the way the board is picked, you can be sure you're going to have trouble because that board will be deferential to the CEO. No issue. You're right. But that's not the way it's supposed to happen. Today, the nominating committee of the board is supposed to be made up of independent directors. And those independent directors are supposed to do the selecting and they're supposed to make the recommendation. That doesn't mean that the CEO shouldn't be consulted because you don't want to get a director that's going to be at war with the CEO right away. You consult with the CEO, for sure you consult with the CEO, but he doesn't call the shot. He may say that person's too tough or blah, 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 but that's not the point. He's got to have a pretty good reason for not liking whoever it is the board comes up with. But today the rule is the independent directors do the selection of the new board members, and I hope that's happening. I'm not in every boardroom, so I don't know that it's happening, and where it's not happening, that's a bad thing. But where it is happening, that's a good thing.
I mean, even you can't be in every boardroom?
I like to try, but it hasn't happened.
One of the things that's becoming increasingly popular is the separation of the chairman position from the CEO position. Is that something that is going to help in name only, or is that really a substantive change?
Again, it all depends on how it's carried out. Do I believe it's necessary? Absolutely.
Why?
Well, because the board is not management. The board's the board and management's management. And the CEO should run management and somebody else should run the board. I can't see how the CEO as chair can monitor himself. And is the CEO as chair going to make sure that bad news gets to the board? No. And to me, the logic is irrefutable. Whoever runs the board should be running the board. It's a different business than running the company. So you have to have a separate chair. That separate chair would be the person who makes sure, to the extent that's humanly possible, that the board's getting the information it needs. Make sure that the right items are on the agenda. Make sure that the bad news comes up. Somebody has to do that, and it can't be the CEO. So it's very, very important. Now you ask, how about that? Supposing the CEO is separate, are we sure it's going to work? Not unless he's really separate and independent. If the old CEO selects the new chair, forget it. That doesn't work either. It's got to be the independent directors deciding who's going to be the separate chair, and that separate chair has to be independent. And again, the chemistry has to be right between the CEO and the chair. All of this is balanced, but that separate chair has to know that he's independent and that he's not kowtowing to the CEO, and that his responsibility is the board, not making the CEO happy. It's a big job.
Well, I think one of the issues is the technical. Are they going to meet the technical requirements of the new, legislation, or are they going to actually embrace this?
Sarah, do I know?
That's the $64 question.
I can only hope, and we can only count on ethics and the board being aware of what its fiduciary responsibilities are. And the more we pound that home to directors, that this is a big job, it's an important job. You got a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, the stakeholders, the community. We don't want this to happen again. This is not good for America.
How important to directors is their insurance at this point?
It's very important because I believe in shareholder lawsuits. I think they're important. I believe that derivative suits and certainly shareholder actions are important, because there has to be an enforcement mechanism. It's all well and good to have these hortatory expressions of what ought to be done or what should be done, even criminal penalties. They serve a purpose, but the lawsuits themselves serve a big purpose, because they say to the directors, if you're going to do something that's cuckoo, you're liable to be sued. So I think there should be these lawsuits. On the other hand, we know that lawsuits can be excessive, and there are a lot of people out there who are bringing lawsuits who, not a lot, but there are some people out there who are bringing lawsuits which are not founded. So the directors are always concerned that they're going to get sued no matter what happens. No matter if there's some story in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, there'll be lawsuits the next day. They know they're going to get sued. Some of them are founded and some of them are ill-founded. So the directors want to be protected, because most of these cases get settled.
But how do you make sure that the insurance doesn't just basically give them a walk?
It doesn't give them a walk. If you've ever been sitting in your chair being deposed, it doesn't give you a walk. It really doesn't, because in every one of these suits, the shareholders are going to be, the directors are going to be deposed. They're going to waste time on a stand being examined by a hostile lawyer for hours and hours and hours. It's going to interrupt their schedules. They're going to be in the newspapers again. They don't like getting sued. I don't like getting sued. Nobody likes getting sued. So the mere fact of being sued is quite a deterrent to silly behavior. And then if there were no way of giving them their legal fees and so on, so that they could take risky actions and so on, good risky actions for which they might get sued as well, they wouldn't serve. I think the insurance is essential. I think the lawsuits are essential, but I think you need that balance.
That's a good balance. We're going to take a break. Thank you.
The Zicklin School of Business at Baruch College of the City University of New York is the largest and most diverse accredited business school in the United States, offering high-quality, full-time and part-time degree programs at the undergraduate, master's, and PhD levels. For information about the Zicklin School of Business, please visit our website, zicklin.baruch.cuny.edu. That's zicklin.baruch.cuny.edu.
I'm talking with Ira Millstein, senior partner at Weil, Gottschall & Manges. Let's talk a little bit about Disney. It's obviously been in the news a great deal in the last few days. What's interesting to me is that in response to 43% of the shareholders saying they'd like to not have Michael Eisner on that board anymore, the reaction is to say, well, okay, we'll take away his chairman title, but he's going to stay on as CEO. Is that hearing the shareholders?
Well, let me say to begin with that I had advised the Disney company back a year or so ago on how to, maybe more, on how to improve its corporate governance. And in my opinion, it's a good board. And I think Senator Mitchell is a good presiding director. And I do not want to say anything which would be construed as saying they're a bad board. So I'm talking hypothetically. They have a tough decision. Any board that gets a 42 or 43% vote against the CEO chair and a 23 or 24% vote against the presiding director has got to sit back and think about what to do. And they did. That board did sit back and think about what to do. And the solution they came up with is to split the job and to make Mitchell the presiding director. So they did respond. Now, whether that response is going to be good enough to mollify the shareholders, I don't know, because the board got a variety of messages. One of the messages that they got from some of the shareholders was split the board. I mean, split the job, and they did. Is that going to be enough?
Well, but the person they put in is someone who was told by 24% of the shareholders, we don't think you should be on the board either.
I think that was more a response to Eisner than it was to Mitchell. I mean, when you look at Mitchell, as I did, this is one of the best there is. I mean, I don't believe Senator Mitchell is anybody's toady, not at all. I just don't. He's a man who tried to settle Ireland, tried to settle Israel, and settled, for me, the dispute between the Deutsche Bank and the insurers down at the Lower Manhattan. And to me, he did one wonderful job. And in working with him over the years, I've never seen him be soft on anything. So I don't think anybody's going to twist Mitchell's tail. So I can't understand really what this violent reaction to Senator Mitchell is. I mean, who can you pick? God to be the next presiding director? I mean, it's very hard to find somebody.
Well, presumably someone who's not associated so closely with Michael Eisner.
I understand, but they had to operate that day to respond, and they did. And they picked the person who, to me, has high repute. Now, is this going to settle with the shareholders? Probably not, because there were other shareholders who objected based on the fact they didn't like the whole board. And they said Senator Mitchell was Eisner's friend, and on into the night. I think the core issue of splitting the job, unfortunately, blew up into a whole variety of other concerns. And frankly, I've never seen a bandwagon like this. Somehow or other, it attracted a whale of amount of attention. 3,000 people attended, and 42% voted against it. Somebody's unhappy about something.
Is this, should we take some heart in the sense that finally shareholders seem to be waking up to some of their responsibilities?
I think that I think that everybody can take heart in the fact that this turnout was enormous. I mean, if I was sitting on the Disney board, I wouldn't take heart.
Sure.
But looking at it from the outside in, as an observer, I would say this is a remarkable event, and every board in the United States is going to look at it and say, something happened here, everybody. And the shareholders are alive and well in the United States.
Why has it been so difficult for shareholders to act in the past? I mean, it seems to me they have a clear responsibility and they've been shirking it just as badly as some of the directors have.
Well, this is one of the great anomalies of all time. Who are the shareholders? I mean, mom and pop, right? A lot. They're not going to get activated. They just, unless something terrible is happening, you're not going to get Main Street terribly active. Today, the shareholders are institutions, basically, and the institutions break down into a variety. You have mutual funds of all kinds, about whom everybody says they have conflicts, as I'm sure you've heard from Mr. Bogle. And do they vote? Not a lot, but they really ought to vote, and they don't vote. Normally they get out if something goes wrong. So are they the kind of shareholders you want voting? I don't know. Are they going to pay attention? I don't know. Will they spend the money to go find out what has to be done? I don't know. Up to now, they haven't done it. The corporate pension funds, big, right? Are they going to vote? Remember noblesse oblige. It's always a question as to whether if I vote against you, are you going to vote against me the next time around? This is not bad. It's life. So you're left pretty much with the public pension funds.
And the unions.
And they're there, and they certainly are making noise. CalPERS and TIACREF and the unions have been there tub thumping. And the issue is they will continue to do that. And that's not a bad thing. They will get attention when they're on the right side of an issue or on the side of an issue which attracts other people. Disney is an issue that attracted other people. You also have wonderful organizations like ISS, the institutional shareholders, who advise funds what to do. And when they come out against you, that's a very powerful voice. So you have the core of activism in the ISS, public pension funds, unions, And when they have an issue which grabs the public's attention, things happen.
But how much can they really affect change? I mean, I get irritated when I hear this term shareholder democracy, because when I think of a democracy, I have a choice of who I vote for. And in most of these situations, you get to vote for the director or you get to withhold your vote. You don't get an alternate slate that could change the way things are in a company.
You even have a worse situation than that. It's a little technical, but you should bear in mind that when it comes to electing directors, it's a plurality, not a majority. So if you have a company with 100 shares, right, and 99 withhold their votes, and 1 votes yes, that director is elected. That's at the heart of the problem. Forget about access and all the rest of it. At the heart of the problem is there's no vote today. There's no majority vote, which brings me to a suggestion which we've just made to the SEC, which may or may not get anybody's attention, but our suggestion, my suggestion, and this is mine alone with my partners, not any client, is that there be a return or a listing requirement requiring a majority vote. In other words, we would get away with the plurality, do away with the plurality rule, and come to a majority vote. What you would do is have a listing requirement that says no director can be elected without a majority vote. And in counting votes, you would count withholds. And you'd probably count broker votes as well. So if 99 said withhold, that director would not be elected. That really happens under my proposal. So
well,
here
that would
is
be a first.
Yeah. So here is an opportunity for for shareholders to really have a say in an election, because if more than 50% withheld, that director would not be elected. The board would have to come up with either a negotiated settlement with the shareholders as to who goes on, or get that director to resign and appoint somebody else, or hold a new vote. But something would happen, and this is the first time such a thing could occur. I sort of like it, obviously.
It's a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
There's other proposals, and the SEC is looking into some of those now.
Yes.
What do you think about that? I mean,
I think something's going to happen.
let's talk about the specifics.
Yeah, specifically, I'm not wildly in favor of access. I really
But
am
can you
not.
tell, what does that mean exactly?
Well, what
is
it
the
means
proposal?
is that there is a proposal that if 35% do something or 50% do something, then the next year the shareholders can put a candidate up, and there would be a contested election, and the shareholders would have a say. I find it cumbersome, difficult. I think getting that kind of vote is going to be difficult. I think having a contested election is not a happy event for corporate America. And I think getting people on the board who represent constituencies is not a good idea. I think despite the protestations that the unions will only put up good people, or the public funds will only put up good people, then they're like the rest of us. They're going to look for somebody who may be more representative of their interests than not. If they don't, they're crazy. What did they go through the whole process for? So that's life, and that's the way things are. I am not happy with that. I really think I would rather put the huge burden on the directors to come up with the right people. And I think my suggestion is one way to go about doing that. It puts a terrific burden on them, especially after Disney. I mean, it seems to me that directors are getting the message that somebody out there doesn't like this mechanism of doing things. So I'd like to give the directors a chance to fix their own house. I really would.
What would be so terrible with a union or a public pension fund having some representation on the board? Why is their point of view not...
Their point of view is very important, and it could be reflected in a number of different ways. But for example, let's take something as silly as outsourcing, right? Which is
well, that's
silly,
not a
but
silly
I mean
topic.
such as important as outsourcing. Maybe it's a good competitive thing to outsource. And maybe you're doing it in a way that'll preserve the company so that later the business can come back. But maybe you're putting people out of work in the process. Now, do you want somebody on the board that's going to really block activities and so on? I don't think the board needs an education that people are going to be hurt by outsourcing. They know it. The question is, will they act responsibly? Do you need a fight in the boardroom to do that? I don't think so. I really don't. Take a merger or an acquisition. You could have a dissension in the boardroom over that, and I don't think that's a good idea. I think, and I've always preferred, to put a huge burden on the board. That's where the law puts it, and that's where it ought to be. And I just want to increase the burden on the board to do the right thing, rather than disrupt a situation that's worked for 100. This is a bad country, and we do pretty well. And by and large, our companies do okay. I mean, by and large, they do. You know, we had a scandal. Fine, we're fixing it. But I wouldn't want to change the way all of America works in that respect.
Okay. Ira, thank you so much for coming. We're going to be back in a few minutes.
Some people think of New York as the world's second home. The City University of New York, with students coming from 90 countries and speaking more than 155 languages, is the world's first university. Find us on the web at cuny.edu or call us at 1-800-CUNY-YES.
Corporate directors are among the most protected species on the planet. Unfortunately, the caricature of cronies getting together to discuss company performance in between golf games and five-course dinners is only a slight exaggeration at many corporations. Technically, directors participate in a shareholder democracy, but practically speaking, shareholders have almost no ability to vote weak directors out. Recently passed legislation and more aggressive regulators have put new pressure on directors to take their responsibilities more seriously. But how far will that really go, and how long will it last? Despite the string of spectacular failures, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, to name a few, no director who presided over them has ever gone to jail. There should be serious consequences for directors who don't fulfill their duties, consequences that can't be assuaged with liability insurance. And true shareholder democracy needs to be instituted. Everywhere else in our society, if you do your job poorly, you're quickly replaced. Directors should not be an exception. For USA Inc., I'm Sarah Bartlett.